The night Elena Cruz entered the De Luca mansion, New York City was breathing slowly, like a beast resting between hunts. Fog clung to the iron gates, wrapping the property in silence so thick it felt intentional. The house was not just a home. It was a command center, a place where decisions were made that never appeared in newspapers but shaped courts, elections, and lives. Everyone in certain circles knew this house. No one spoke about it openly, and almost no one who entered it without permission ever left. Elena paused at the gate, her hand tightening around the strap of her worn bag. Inside it were cleaning gloves, simple tools, and a folded paper with her fake name printed neatly at the top. Her real name stayed buried, along with the life she had once lived. She reminded herself to breathe. This was only a job. That lie was necessary. Without it, she would not survive the night. Inside the mansion, Matteo De Luca stood before a wall of glass, watching the city lights stretch endlessly below him. From this height, New York City looked obedient, controlled. He liked it that way. Power to him was not loud violence. It was influence, connections, the ability to make a single call and watch systems bend. His mafia hood was polished and disciplined, woven tightly with politicians, judges, and senior law enforcement. To the public, he was a successful businessman. To the underworld, he was inevitable. Matteo's face showed no emotion as his head of security informed him that the new cleaner had arrived. Matteo nodded once, dismissing the man. Cleaners came and went. None mattered. Yet something made him turn toward the security screen moments later. The cameras showed a woman stepping through the front door, posture straight, movements careful but not afraid. She did not stare at the marble floors or the art on the walls. She did not rush. She moved like someone who understood danger and respected it. That was the first moment Elena was seen. Her footsteps echoed softly as she began her work. The house smelled of expensive wood, leather, and something sharper: control. Every room carried an unspoken warning. Elena cleaned without rushing, her senses open, her mind recording patterns. Who walked where? Which doors stayed locked? Which men spoke quietly and which carried authority without words? She had learned long ago that survival depended on observation, not curiosity. As she wiped a long dining table that had hosted mafia leaders, politicians, and men who decided the fate of neighborhoods, Elena's mind slipped backward. To another table. Smaller. Cheaper. A family laughing before everything burned. She forced the memory down. This was not the place for weakness. Humanity was dangerous here. Upstairs, Matteo watched again. He did not know why. He told himself it was habit. Control demanded awareness. Still, his gaze lingered. There was no fear in her body language. No hunger for what she saw. She behaved as if she had already seen worse. That unsettled him. Their first real encounter came without warning. Elena turned a corner carrying supplies and collided with a solid chest. The impact sent her bucket crashing to the floor, water spilling across expensive marble. For one suspended second, the house seemed to hold its breath. Matteo looked down at her. She recognized him instantly. Everyone did, once they saw him in person. Authority wrapped around him like a second skin. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to threaten. Power listened to him automatically. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly and knelt at once, reaching for a cloth. Most people froze or begged when they made mistakes in this house. She did neither. "Look at me," Matteo said. The command was soft, absolute. Elena hesitated only long enough to steady herself, then lifted her gaze. Their eyes met, and something invisible tightened between them. Her expression held no pleading, only depth. Something heavy and lived in. Matteo felt an unfamiliar flicker of curiosity. He crushed it instantly. Curiosity led to mistakes. "Be careful," he said and walked past her. But even as he moved away, her presence stayed with him, like a note that did not resolve. Days passed. Elena worked. Matteo observed. Business continued. Calls about shipments, quiet meetings with men who carried state badges and criminal souls in equal measure. Mafia clubs buzzed with whispers of De Luca decisions. Elena heard fragments and stitched none of it to her face. That silence was her shield. At night, alone in her rented room, Elena unlocked a thin metal box hidden beneath loose floorboards. Inside were old photographs, legal documents, and a single phone she never turned on. The life she had buried stared back at her. A father who had believed in law. A mother who had believed in goodness. A name that had been erased by a single order issued from a man who would never remember them. Matteo De Luca. The realization did not bring rage anymore. Rage had burned out years ago. What remained was purpose. Back at the mansion, suspicion stirred among Matteo's men. One of them mentioned that the cleaner listened too closely. Matteo silenced him with a look. The room obeyed. Elena felt it from across the hall, the invisible protection she had not asked for. It confused her more than hostility would have. That night, Matteo stood alone with a glass of whiskey, city lights reflecting in his eyes. He had everything: wealth, control, respect. Yet something small and quiet had entered his world and disrupted its rhythm. He did not like unanswered questions. And Elena stood outside his office door, memorizing the sound of his voice, counting the seconds between pauses. Her dark love for justice, sharpened by loss, was beginning to clash with something she had never planned for. Unexpected love, dangerous and human, growing in the house of the man she was meant to expose. Neither of them knew it yet. But the secret was already moving toward the moment it would surface. And when it did, power would not be enough to stop what followed. Morning light entered the De Luca mansion carefully, filtered through thick glass and heavy curtains, as if even the sun understood it was not welcome without permission. Elena arrived early as always. She preferred the quiet hours before the house filled with voices, before power moved openly through hallways and rooms. Early mornings gave her space to think, and thinking was dangerous but necessary. Matteo De Luca had slept little. He rarely did. His nights were filled with numbers, calls, and silent calculations. Yet this morning his thoughts returned again and again to the same small disruption in his controlled world, the cleaner who moved like someone trained by loss. He disliked distractions. He disliked unexplained instincts even more. As Elena cleaned the study, she noticed new security cameras. Small change. Intentional. She adjusted instantly, keeping her movements natural. Inside, her pulse slowed. This was not panic. This was familiarity. She had lived under surveillance once before, in another life, another city, another version of herself that no longer existed. Matteo met with a state official that morning, a man whose handshake carried weight and whose smile never reached his eyes. Their conversation was polite, precise, and dangerous. They spoke of zoning laws, redevelopment, and campaign funding, words that hid threats and favors. Elena passed through the room silently, serving coffee, invisible yet present. She heard everything and stored nothing on her face. When the official left, Matteo noticed Elena's reflection in the polished surface of the table. For a brief moment, their eyes met again through glass and shine. Something passed between them, not attraction yet, not trust but recognition. Two people shaped by systems bigger than themselves. Later that day, one of Matteo's men followed Elena. He was careful, experienced. Elena sensed him anyway. She took a longer route home, through crowded streets and narrow alleys, letting the city swallow her. When she finally reached her room, she locked the door and sat on the floor, breathing slowly. She did not cry. Tears belonged to the past. She opened the metal box again. Her fingers brushed the edge of a photo. Her father in uniform, standing proudly beneath a courthouse seal. He had believed in humanity, in law, in right and wrong. He had believed men like Matteo De Luca were temporary shadows. That belief had cost him everything. Back at the mansion, Matteo received confirmation that Elena's background check showed nothing. No family, no long work history, no mistakes. Clean records made him uneasy. In his world, everyone had stains. Days turned into a quiet pattern. Elena worked. Matteo watched. Conversations grew slightly longer. Commands softened into questions. Elena answered politely, carefully, revealing nothing real. Yet something shifted. Matteo found himself noticing details. How she flinched slightly at raised voices. How she paused before entering rooms with certain men. How she never touched anything unnecessary. One evening, a violent argument broke out between two of Matteo's associates. Voices rose. Threats followed. Elena stood frozen near the doorway. Matteo intervened instantly, his presence silencing the room. His authority was absolute. When it was over, he noticed Elena's hands shaking. "Go home early," he said. It was not kindness. It was instinct. And it unsettled him. That night, Elena walked through rain-soaked streets, her thoughts heavier than the clouds above. Matteo De Luca was not the monster she had imagined. He was worse. He was human, controlled, capable of restraint. That complicated everything. And Matteo, alone in his office once more, poured another drink he did not finish. He wondered when protecting a cleaner had become a reflex. He wondered why the idea of losing her presence from the house felt wrong. The distance between hunter and target was shrinking, and neither of them was prepared for what that meant. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the city washed and quiet, but tension still clung to the De Luca mansion like moisture and stone. Elena arrived later than usual that morning. Not late enough to draw attention but late enough to feel watched. The gates opened without pause. The guards nodded. Routine never broke, yet something beneath it had shifted. Matteo De Luca sensed it too. He stood in the private gym, striking a heavy bag with controlled force. Each movement was precise. Discipline had kept him alive when others had fallen to greed or impulse. Yet discipline could not explain why his thoughts returned to Elena Cruz more often than they should. He told himself it was strategy. Understanding people meant controlling outcomes. Still, when his head of security mentioned her name again, Matteo stopped mid-motion. "She keeps to herself," the man said. "No calls. No visitors. No one lives that clean," Matteo replied. Elena spent the morning dusting a rarely used wing of the mansion. The rooms were filled with artifacts, old paintings, antique weapons, symbols of past empires. She recognized the message immediately. Power did not begin with Matteo. He had inherited and expanded it. That made him more dangerous than men who rose from nothing. As she wiped a framed document on the wall, her breath caught. It was an old development approval stamped and signed years ago. Her eyes traced the signature slowly. The same name. The same man. Her father had tried to stop that project. He had found evidence. He had believed the system would protect him. It hadn't. Her fingers trembled for the first time since she entered the house. That afternoon, Matteo hosted a private meeting with leaders from 2 major Mafia clubs. The room filled with low voices, expensive cologne, and quiet threat. Elena served drinks, her presence accepted, her existence barely acknowledged. Yet she noticed everything: the hierarchy, the unspoken respect Matteo commanded, the way decisions settled instantly once he spoke. This was not brute power. This was control refined. One of the men laughed too loudly, disrespecting the space. Matteo did not raise his voice. He simply looked at him. The laughter died. Elena felt it then, the weight of Matteo's authority pressing down like gravity. She understood how cities bent around men like him, how humanity disappeared quietly, signed away in rooms like this. After the meeting, Matteo called her name. Elena stopped. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. She obeyed. "Come outside. Storm inside." "You've worked in places like this before?" he asked. "Yes," she answered truthfully, carefully. "You don't react," he continued. "Most people do." Elena met his gaze. Reaction draws attention. Something unreadable crossed Matteo's face. He leaned back, studying her as if she were a problem he could not solve. "You're smarter than this job requires," he said. "So are many people," she replied softly. "Not everyone gets choices." The silence stretched. Matteo felt it. A boundary crossed, not by defiance but by honesty. He dismissed her moments later, yet the conversation stayed with him long after she left the room. That night Elena dreamed of fire, of sirens, of her father's voice telling her to run. She woke before dawn, heart racing, the past clawing its way into the present. She knew then that staying close to Matteo De Luca was becoming dangerous in ways she had not planned. At the mansion, Matteo received a report that confirmed his unease. Someone from Elena's past had been erased deliberately. Not by chance. By design. That meant purpose. Purpose meant threat. And yet, when he saw her later that day, moving quietly through the hallway, something inside him resisted the conclusion forming in his mind. Power had taught him to eliminate risks early. Humanity whispered another option, one he had rarely listened to. Two lives shaped by the same system were now circling each other closer than ever. The secret was no longer sleeping. It was awake. The mansion had a new rhythm now. Elena moved through it with practiced silence, Matteo's presence always at the edge of her awareness. Their encounters were brief, subtle, each loaded with meaning neither fully acknowledged. Yet the air between them was taut, like a string pulled too tight. One wrong move and it could snap with consequences neither was ready to face. That morning, Elena entered the private library, a room few saw. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound books, rare manuscripts, and framed photographs of powerful men lined the walls. Dust coated the edges. She worked quietly, aware of the cameras but trusting her own control. Her hands hovered over a thick ledger before she realized what it was. A list of contacts, alliances, and debts. Men who owed Matteo favors, and men who could betray him in an instant. Her pulse quickened. Information like this could topple empires. And now she held it in her hands, not as a tool for Matteo, but as a weapon she might need one day. Matteo had sensed it before she even touched the ledger. Watching from his office upstairs, he noted the slight hesitation in her movements. She was meticulous, careful, but curiosity, or something darker, was unmistakable. He did not approach. Instead, he observed, letting the game unfold. Power was not about rushing. Power was about waiting for the right moment. Later, an urgent phone call pulled Matteo into the city. Elena was left alone, cleaning the grand hallway. A knock at the front door brought unexpected tension. An unmarked envelope slid through the slot. Elena picked it up cautiously. Inside was a photograph. Her as a child, taken without her knowledge, her parents in the background. A note followed, typed neatly. "We know who you are." Her hands froze, her mind racing. The past had followed her into this house, the very place she had believed would be a sanctuary. The secret she had buried so carefully was no longer hers alone. When Matteo returned hours later, he noticed her demeanor had changed. The subtle tremor in her hands, the way she avoided his gaze, the distance that wasn't there before. It all told him something critical. Elena was hiding more than just herself. And in his world, hiding meant a potential threat. He waited until the evening to confront her. Alone in the library, the low lamplight casting long shadows across the walls, Matteo stood silent, watching her. "You're not just a cleaner," he said finally, voice calm but edged with authority. Elena stiffened. "I'm exactly what I appear to be," she replied. Her voice betrayed nothing, though her fingers twitched at the edge of the desk. Matteo stepped closer. "Do not lie to me. You carry history here. I can see it." She looked up, eyes defiant but wary. "Some truths don't belong to you," she whispered. "And some truths will find me anyway," Matteo replied, leaning against the desk, his presence dominating the small space. For a moment, silence enveloped them. The weight of unspoken danger, potential betrayal, and a strange, forbidden pull between them hung thick in the air. In another world they might have been allies or lovers, but here every choice was a risk, every glance a gamble. Elena turned away first, her mind spinning. She had survived threats, betrayals, and violence. But this proximity to a man who could destroy everything she had left was different. And yet, despite herself, a flicker of something dangerous stirred. Fascination, respect, and the faintest trace of attraction. That night, as Matteo returned to his office, he poured a drink he did not intend to finish. His thoughts were restless. Control was everything, yet Elena had unsettled him more than any rival, any betrayal, or any plot against him. The paradox was maddening. A woman whose life he should dismiss had begun to occupy his mind in ways he could not predict. Meanwhile, Elena sat by the window of her small room, the city lights glinting against her reflection. The envelope lay open beside her. Fear, anger, and calculation fought within her. One thing was certain. Survival would demand decisions she had not yet imagined. And the man whose house she cleaned, the man whose power defined life and death in New York, was no longer just a silent observer. The first cracks in trust had appeared. The past was no longer silent. And the pull between predator and prey, between power and vulnerability, was accelerating toward a collision neither could avoid. The following days carried a weight that neither Elena nor Matteo could ignore. The mansion, normally a fortress of order, seemed to hum with unease. Elena's movements, once effortless and invisible, now drew subtle attention. Matteo noticed the careful pauses, the way her eyes lingered on certain documents and corners, and the faint tremor that had not been there before. It was no longer just curiosity. She carried history with her, and the house could not contain it forever. Matteo convened an unexpected meeting with his inner circle in the dimly lit conference room. The air was thick with cigar smoke, whispered threats, and the subtle shuffling of men who knew power but never dared challenge it. Alliances were reaffirmed. Debts were called in. Favors traded silently like weapons passed in shadow. Elena's name was not mentioned aloud, yet each man sensed that her presence had stirred a ripple, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to change the balance of trust. Meanwhile, Elena moved through the mansion with a new wariness. Her eyes scanned the hallways, her ears tuned to the quietest sounds. One of Matteo's lieutenants, a man whose loyalty was unquestioned but whose patience was thin, approached her casually, as if testing boundaries. "You know, some people don't survive here long," he said, eyes flicking toward the boss's office. Elena's heart skipped a beat, but her expression remained calm. She only nodded, careful not to betray knowledge of her past. That evening, Matteo summoned her to the private study. The room was warm, bathed in the amber glow of a single lamp. Outside, the city breathed in silence, oblivious to the tension inside. Matteo's eyes were sharp, piercing through the calm veneer Elena maintained. He did not speak immediately. He simply observed, letting the weight of his gaze press upon her, testing the invisible boundaries between them. "You're hiding something," he said finally, voice low and deliberate. "I've observed enough to know that much. But hiding it here in my house is dangerous." Elena swallowed, a cold shiver running through her. She wanted to speak, to lie, to deflect, but instinct and years of survival kept her silent. Her secret, buried for so long, was not just her past. It was a living weapon, capable of reshaping the delicate web Matteo had built. One wrong revelation and both their worlds could crumble. "I am what I appear to be," she said carefully, her voice steady despite the storm inside. Matteo studied her for a long moment. His mind, trained to read people like open books, detected the slightest deviation in her posture, the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. "I don't believe you," he said almost gently. The words hung in the air, heavier than any threat. Elena's dark secret, the past that had followed her, shaped her and driven her here, pressed against the walls of her composure. She had come to this house to survive, to observe, to plan. Yet now, in the presence of the man whose authority defined life and death in New York, survival required more than stealth. It demanded control over emotions she thought she had buried forever. Later that night, Elena revisited the metal box hidden beneath her floorboards. Her fingers traced the edges of old photographs, documents, and the silent phone she never powered on. The life she had left behind, a family destroyed, promises unkept, justice denied, was calling back. She realized the delicate balance between power, survival, and morality was about to be tested in ways she could not yet predict. Matteo in his office reviewed reports from the Mafia clubs. A shipment had been delayed, a minor rival questioned too harshly. The patterns, he realized, were being influenced, not by his enemies, but by a ghost he could not yet identify. Elena. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was an active variable in the carefully controlled equation of his world. When their paths crossed later in the mansion, the tension was palpable. Neither spoke, yet each knew that the game had changed. Elena's presence was no longer peripheral. Matteo's observation was no longer neutral. Unspoken acknowledgement of their intertwined fates hovered between them, a silent contract written in glances, movements, and shared space. The first sparks of dark love ignited. Not passion, not tenderness, but the dangerous allure of connection in a world where trust was a currency more valuable than gold. Each moment, each careful interaction, pushed them closer to a confrontation with truth, loyalty, and desire. And Elena's secret? It was no longer hidden from fate. Only time would reveal whether it would destroy them, or bind them together in ways neither expected. The city never truly slept, and neither did the shadows in the De Luca mansion. Matteo moved through the halls with silent purpose, his presence an invisible weight pressing on every corner. Yet for the first time in years he found himself unsettled, not by rivals, not by law enforcement, but by Elena. The cleaner who should have remained insignificant, now commanded more attention than any ally or enemy. Elena, meanwhile, moved through her tasks with precision, but her mind was elsewhere. The envelope from weeks ago, the photographs, and the fragments of the past she had tried to suppress were becoming impossible to ignore. She had a plan, a way to use the knowledge she had collected over the years to right the wrongs done to her family. But executing it meant treading dangerously close to Matteo's power. A power that had begun to blur the lines between threat and fascination. That afternoon, a call from one of Matteo's lieutenants changed everything. A rival Mafia club had made a bold move. An assault on one of Matteo's warehouses that threatened shipments, connections, and reputation. The news spread tension through the mansion like a current of electricity. Elena, observing from the periphery, noticed Matteo's calm but deadly focus. Every movement, every command was precise, controlled. She realized that the man she had begun to feel something for was a force of nature, unyielding, calculating, and lethal. Later, Matteo found her in the library. The room was silent except for the faint scratching of her cleaning brush against the polished wood. He leaned against the doorway, watching her, his expression unreadable. "You know more than you're letting on," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of authority and curiosity combined. Elena paused, eyes fixed on the table. "I know enough," she replied. Her voice was calm but her heart raced. She was walking a tightrope between revelation and survival. One wrong word could unravel everything. Matteo stepped closer. "Enough for what?" His gaze pierced her, searching for the truth hidden beneath layers of caution. "Enough to betray me? Enough to save yourself? Or enough to destroy the past that follows you here?" She did not answer immediately. Her hands clenched slightly, hiding her tension in the folds of her apron. Her secret, the dark, painful history that had shaped her, was closer to being exposed than ever. And Matteo, sensing it, pressed without malice but with relentless instinct. The next evening brought unexpected danger. A small explosion rocked the outskirts of the city, a message from rival factions designed to test Matteo's reach and ruthlessness. The mansion's alarms blared. Guards moved swiftly, and Matteo's calm authority transformed the chaos into order almost instantly. Elena observed, noting every pattern, every strategy, every vulnerability. She realized that she had underestimated the man whose house she cleaned. Matteo De Luca did not just command power. He embodied it, and anyone who dared to threaten it would face swift consequences. Later that night, in the solitude of her room, Elena contemplated her next move. She had the knowledge, the drive, and the moral clarity to act, but the emotional complexity was new. Matteo was no longer simply a target or an obstacle. He was a man who commanded respect, fear, and an inexplicable intrigue. And for the first time, she wondered if her plans could survive the humanity she felt growing for him. A humanity she had buried long ago. Matteo, standing alone by the window of his office, watched the city's lights glimmer. The recent attack had only strengthened his control, but it had also reminded him of his vulnerabilities. Elena's presence lingered in his thoughts, a mix of suspicion, curiosity, and something deeper he could not yet name. He knew her secret was out there, waiting. The question was whether it would come to him first, or whether she would reveal it on her own terms. The night ended with unspoken tension thick in the air. Both of them were aware that their worlds had shifted irreversibly. Power, danger, and forbidden attraction now intersected in ways neither could ignore. And in the quiet spaces between cleaning and commanding, plotting and observing, the lines between trust and betrayal, love and survival, were beginning to blur. The following week, the mansion carried a new intensity. Every corridor, every corner, seemed to hum with unspoken tension. Elena moved through her tasks with precise efficiency, but her mind was a storm of calculations, fears, and memories she had fought to suppress. The photograph, the documents, the fragments of her past, they were no longer safely hidden. Someone, somewhere, had traced the threads, and the danger was closing in faster than she anticipated. Matteo's schedule became even more consuming. Meetings with rival clubs, calls with politicians, and strategic oversight of New York City's underworld consumed his days. Yet even in the midst of power, his thoughts often drifted to Elena. She was no longer a background presence. She had become a variable he could not ignore. A person whose motives, skills, and secrets threatened to alter the balance he had spent decades constructing. One evening, Matteo summoned her to the private study under pretense of reviewing household security protocols. The room was dim, lit only by the warm glow of a single lamp. Elena approached cautiously, aware that this encounter could shift everything. Matteo did not speak immediately. He leaned against the desk, eyes fixed on her, reading every micro-expression. "You've been careful," he said finally, voice low, "but not careful enough." Elena's pulse quickened. I don't understand," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "You've seen more than you should have," Matteo continued. "And I know you've hidden something from me. Don't think I can't see it." She met his gaze, her own eyes steady despite the storm inside. "Not everything is yours to see," she said softly, masking the tension coiled in her chest. The words were true, yet incomplete. Her dark secret, the past she had tried to bury, the people she had lost, the motivations that had driven her to this house, hovered dangerously close to revelation. One wrong move, one slip, and the truth would be laid bare. Before Matteo could respond, an urgent call disrupted the moment. A rival faction had launched an unexpected attack on one of Matteo's properties, a bold challenge to his authority, and a direct threat to his empire. The mansion erupted into controlled chaos. Guards scrambled, communications buzzed, and Matteo's command transformed the potential panic into precise action. Elena observed from the shadows, noting strategies, weaknesses, and patterns. She realized she had underestimated the scale of Matteo's power and the precision with which he maintained it. Every decision he made was deliberate, every movement calculated. She felt both fear and admiration, a complex mix that was entirely new. After the crisis was neutralized, Matteo returned to the study. Elena remained standing, hands at her sides, her mind racing. He studied her silently, then leaned closer. "Your secret will surface eventually," he said. "I can sense it. But until then, I need to know if I can trust you. That choice belongs to you." Her throat tightened. Trust. The word was foreign in her world. She had spent years surviving without it, building walls so high that even hope could not scale them. And yet, in Matteo's presence, the idea of trust, dangerous, fraught, and impossible, lingered. That night, Elena returned to her room, heart heavy, mind restless. The envelope, the photos, and the memories pressed against her like shadows. Her past demanded attention, her present demanded strategy, and her emerging feelings for Matteo demanded control. She realized that surviving in this house was no longer just about concealment. It was about navigating an intricate web of power, emotion, and morality. Matteo, standing alone in the observation room, reviewed surveillance feeds and city reports. His empire was intact, but something fundamental had shifted. Elena was no longer just a cleaner. She was a force, subtle but undeniable, shaping events from within his walls. And the magnetic tension between them, a dark, dangerous attraction neither could ignore, was becoming impossible to deny. By the end of the night, one truth was clear. The past was no longer silent, the rival factions were more audacious, and the line between survival and surrender, power and emotion, trust and betrayal, had begun to blur irreversibly. In this world of shadows and control, one thing was certain: the house would never be the same again, and neither would they. The mansion was unusually silent that evening. Even the city outside, normally a restless beast, seemed subdued under the weight of what was about to unfold. Elena moved carefully through the corridors, her hands steady but her mind racing. The envelope, the photographs, the documents, her past was no longer just memories. It demanded action, exposure, and reckoning. Matteo sensed the shift instantly. He had been observing patterns, movements, and subtle cues for weeks, but now something tangible threatened to pierce the controlled order of his house. Elena's presence was no longer peripheral. It was central, explosive, and impossible to ignore. In the private study, Matteo waited, a calm yet commanding figure framed by the amber glow of the lamp. His eyes caught hers the moment she entered. She did not flinch. She did not bow. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced life and death before and survived. "I need to tell you," Elena began, voice measured but fierce. "Everything you think you know about me is only half the truth. My past, my family. It intersects with this world in ways you don't imagine." Matteo studied her silently. Every word she spoke was weighed, every hesitation noted. "I've sensed it," he said finally. "And yet you're still here. Why?" "Because I had to survive," she replied. "And because some things are worth staying for, even if they're dangerous." The tension between them became almost tangible, a taut string vibrating with unspoken emotion. But before more could be said, the mansion erupted with alarms. Rival Mafia factions had moved, attacking Matteo's operations with sudden, brutal precision. The quiet house transformed instantly into a battlefield. Elena instinctively fell into motion, assisting guards, relaying information, her mind mapping strategy as if she had been trained for this exact moment. Matteo observed, a mix of respect and awe crossing his usually unreadable expression. She was more than a cleaner. She was a force, precise, dangerous, and indispensable. The fight escalated. Gunfire echoed, shadows clashed, and the mansion became a theater of chaos. Matteo moved with lethal precision, neutralizing threats, while Elena's intelligence and knowledge of the layout allowed them to gain an advantage. Together, in an unspoken but undeniable partnership, they turned the tide. After the last rival was subdued, the mansion was silent again. Dust and smoke hung in the air, a stark reminder of the night's violence. Elena stood beside Matteo, both breathing heavily. The danger had passed, but the personal reckoning remained. "You could have left," Matteo said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You could have walked away." Elena looked at him, eyes unwavering. "I didn't. Not because I had to survive, but because I wanted to choose this. To stand here with you even knowing everything I've done, everything I carry." For the first time, Matteo stepped closer, the aura of power softening just enough to allow vulnerability. Their eyes met, and the tension shifted, no longer a battlefield of suspicion but of understanding. The darkness, the danger, the human flaws, all of it, intertwined in that moment. "You're reckless," he murmured. "And you're infuriating," she replied with a small, almost imperceptible smile. For the first time, the walls between them broke. Dark love, forged in danger and tempered by trust and respect, found its place. In the mansion that had always been a fortress of control and fear, something new had taken root. Connection, passion, and the acknowledgement that even in a world ruled by power and violence, humanity could still emerge. The night ended with silence, but a silence heavier than before. Not of threat, but of possibility. Elena's secret had been revealed, the rivals had been defeated, and the bond between them, forged in darkness, had solidified. And as the city lights twinkled below, Matteo and Elena stood together, shadows of the past behind them, the future uncertain yet theirs to navigate. The house would never be the same again. Neither would they.